one additional activity to make them economically reasonable. You've got people that are willing to pay more. They're going to send away so that they're behind the Japanese carriers. That the ships sail. The Japanese ships are coming eastbound toward Midway. The Japanese ships, the carriers, they launch an airstrike on Midway early in the morning of June 4th, I want to think. Enclosed cockpit has a radio. This is a great step up. The BT phase is clearly learning to fly Army style or Navy style. At the end of the BT phase, as I said, you're a pilot. After the BT phase, the advanced phase was to prepare the pilot to go into an actual line unit. They had a fighter curriculum, which was flown on the AT-6 Texan, of which we have one outside you'll get to see. Then they had a bunch of multi-engine trainers that they used to train for either multi-engine bombers, either 2-engine or 4-engine bombers, or for flying transports, okay? At the end of all 4 phases, they pinned on the butter bars of either a second lieutenant or an ensign and went off to their units to fly and fight. We'll talk a little, in a few minutes over here, we'll talk about another group that was flying during that time, the Women's Air Force Service pilots, which were not in the military at the time. Bob's an old timer, okay. But our aircraft is an old timer too, so we'll start there with the aircraft story. Pearl Harbor is bombed December 7th, 1941. Early in 1942, President Roosevelt says the American people, the morale is really low. We need to figure out some way to strike back at the Japanese, preferably in their own homeland. Goes to the military and says, what can you do? A Navy captain, in those days, a Navy captain pilot, remembers he's flying into one of the airfields that's right there around the DC area, and painted on the runway is the outline of a carrier deck. This was routine for Navy pilots. All their training, they learned how to get down and take off from relatively short pieces of land called a carrier deck, or steel, I suppose. Okay, 600 to 800 feet long. He has the idea, can we get a plane, a group of planes, onto a carrier and take them to bomb the Japanese and the Japanese homeland? Quite obviously, the Navy doesn't have the planes to do it. So he turns to Army Air Corps' Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle at that time was a lieutenant colonel in the Army Air Corps. He was one of the first aeronautical engineers. He was one of the aerial racers during the 1930s. This guy, if it had to do with airplanes, he'd done it and probably wrote the textbook, okay? Doolittle says, you want to put a bunch of my 2-engine bombers on a carrier? And the Navy captain says, yeah, you think you can do it? They get together a group of pilots and they scratch their heads. They go down to Northwest Florida, not far from where the Navy trains at Pensacola now. They've got the dirt fields down there, but they've got laid out the outline of the carrier deck. Take a bunch of B-25s down there, and sure enough, they can get off in the distance needed on that carrier deck. Remember, no catapults at the time on the carriers that we had, okay? Doolittle and his team come up with a plan. They train 16 crews. They're going to fly B-25 bombers. B-25 has the range. It has a bomb load that's significant enough. The idea is they're going to launch from the carriers. They're going to overfly Japan, drop bombs on, I think it was 5 cities. And then they're going to fly over the coast of China. The coast of China in those days was occupied by the Japanese. And they were going to recover at friendly Chinese airfields deeper into China. That was the plan, okay? To get the range that they needed to go from the carrier out in the Pacific all the way into central China, they stripped down these aircraft, 16 of them. What weight they didn't need was turned into either fuel or bombs, okay? As for instance, the 2 tail guns on the B-25 50 caliber machine guns weigh about 100 pounds apiece. This is a mission that is wholly based on surprise. So if somebody's on your tail, you're in trouble to begin with. Put black painted broomsticks instead of the 2 50 caliber machine guns, thereby saving 200 pounds that could be put into fuel. They put in an extra fuel tank. They took out a turret. They maximized the performance of this aircraft for the single mission that it was going to be on. To give you an idea of exactly what they looked at and how far down they went, if you look in this box here, the big black object on your right is a Norden bomb sight. It is a 1940 era computer. It is not a digital computer like we know today, but it's one that's based on physical principles. The bombardiers could line up a target and pretty much drop with accuracy if the plane had good weather and so forth and so on. Anyway, the Norden, and this is not all of it, there are other pieces that come along with it to hook into the airplane. The Norden bomb sight, again, weighs in excess of 100 pounds. Well, the mission the Doolittle's Raiders are on, they're not worried about accuracy. The whole idea is to pound a bunch of Japanese cities with 500-pound bombs, get their attention, raise the morale of American folks at home. The bombardier has really a simple mission. Are we generally near the target? If we are generally near the target, what altitude are we at? And what speed are we flying? Because the whole idea is, remember, gravity affects the bomb. When the bomb first comes out of the airplane, it's moving at the same speed as the airplane. Gravity takes over. You want your airplane to be past the point where your bomb hits the deck and goes off. The solution for a sight, instead of this big old heavy Norden, is this piece of aluminum here. And if you look, it's got a single shot 22, sight picture, okay? It's a piece of aluminum. I'm told that it was about 75 cents worth of aluminum back in 1941 or 42. It's got 3 settings, 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees. It's a protractor. Nothing more than your high school or grade school protractor. The bombardier is looking, he sees the rough target, he gets the skipper of the aircraft to tell him how high and how fast, picks one of the 3 settings, when it lines up, bombs away. And that's exactly what they did. Okay, now we're gonna take a minute. Bob here is a crewman from the B-24s during World War II. He is our oldest
what?
docent, whatever. He's our oldest speaker. He'll be happy to talk with you.
He owns a Corvette too.
Oh,
I'm not getting old. I will be old. I'm only 97 now, so
Oh, you're still a young man.
I'm still middle-aged, you might say. But welcome to the Lone Star Flight Museum. It's good to see everybody here. We certainly enjoy people visiting our fine place. I happen to be a top turret gunner on a B-24. My crew was all about the same age I was at that time. We were between 18, 19 years old, somewhere around there. Except the pilot, he was an old guy. We used to call him Dad. He was 22 years old. It seemed like everybody was young in the Second World War for some reason. But you know, you have no fear when you're 18 years old. You're bulletproof, you know, really. So I enjoy being here and keeping the memories alive. That's why I show up. My bomb group lost quite a few men. It lost 1,505 men killed or missing in action. It lost over 700 wounded, over 550 prisoners of war. It lost 198 aircraft to enemy aircraft fire and 114 planes to enemy fighters. So those are the guys that I want their memories as long as if I have to crawl in here on my hands and knees, I'm going to keep their memories alive. It's not what I did, it's what they did. Anybody have any questions about?
Over here, Bob.
Yeah, I read somewhere that when they were bombing Hiroshima, that a couple of the captains had friendship medals, and they put the friendship medals from Japan on those bombs and dropped them back onto them.
Let me get that hold this thing straight.
We'll have to.
Probably it could be.
It sounds like something they would have done.
Yes. I was based with the 15th Air Force, which was in England, or excuse me, in Italy. And the 8th Air Force, there were two Air Forces in Europe. And the 8th Air Force was out of England. Both Air Forces used B-17s and B-24s as heavy bombers. The B-24 looks just like a B-725, except it has 4 engines instead of 2. And it carries a bigger bomb load and so forth. I flew 25 missions.
The B-29s dropped the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. They were part of the 20th Air Force, which was a special unit set up for those operations. It was quite common, there's lots of photos, it was quite common for particularly the bomb loaders, the guys on the ground loading the aircraft, to put some sort of chalked or painted or attached message to Adolf Hitler on the bombs that
Yes.
they were used.
Yeah,
I have no doubt that in Japan, over Japan, they probably did the same thing.
That was in the Pearl Harbor.
and it made a big difference. How they place those bombs under there depends. For instance, if you're flying with 500-pound bombs, they wanted to keep the center of gravity of all those planes exactly the same. So if you put the bombs in the wrong places in the bomb bay, you're going to be in real trouble. The pilot will have a terrible time getting the plane off the ground. So a lot of people had a lot of different things to do to make sure that every flight, because it could be carrying 2,000-pound bombs or 1,000-pound bombs, or it could, and we had a mission where we were in support of the 5th Army, and flew at 250 feet with fragmentation bombs. Those are personnel bombs of 50 pounds. They're about that big. And they fit in racks, and they all come tumbling out at the same time.
Well, Bob, thanks for your time. We've got another group
Well,
coming
thank you
through,
very
too.
much, and I hope you enjoy your visit.
Yeah, thank you.
I never thought I'd see a Doolittle Raider bomb. And I was just in 2001 with Ben Affleck.
It is a superb
Talking about it.
person who did this must have spent years. Come on around, folks. We're going to talk about the Doolittle raid a little bit more in detail, give you a visual concept, and then show you some photos of exactly what went on. Doolittle trained up his crews, selected 16. They flew out to California. The Navy rolled up a couple of carriers, the Hornet and one of the Hornet's buddies. They loaded the 16 Doolittle planes onto the Hornet. I say loaded, these aircraft are way too big to land on the carriers. They figured out a way to take off, and nobody even bothered with trying to figure out how to land. They were going to take off, they were going to fly over Japan, pardon me, and they were going to land in China. It craned them up on the deck. This is exactly what it would have looked like. They got out there in the North Pacific. The plan was to go into about 600 miles, 500 miles from Japan. Okay, plans being what they are, all hell broke loose. They're steaming away to the west toward Japan, and they see a small vessel. Turns out it's a Japanese trawler. It's got a radio mast. They figure, oh crap, these guys have got to send a message, and they later on confirmed that they had sent a message back to Japan saying, bunch of U.S. Navy carriers and other ships out here heading your way. The message was sent 700 miles from Japan. Okay, Doolittle gets together with the ship's crew, gets together with his pilots, says, you know, this is going to make it more than just a one-way mission. You're barely going to be able to make it to China, period. Okay? They decide to do it anyway. The crews get in their aircraft, they fire them up. It's a sequence. The pilot and the co-pilot in the B-25s. This is Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle, and his co-pilot was then Captain Cole. Captain Cole was a Texan, died at 104 about 5 years ago, and our aircraft overflew his funeral. Anyway, Doolittle and Cole, they're in there in their aircraft. They've got both feet on both rudder pedals, which are the brakes when you're on the ground. They've got them jammed to the floor. They run their engines up to max, full military power plus some. The captain of the ship calls down to the engine room, give us as much speed as you can, Chief. Turns his aircraft into the wind, gets wind over the deck, giving you another few knots of wind across your wings for lift. Last but not least, this is the North Pacific. There's some swells. They wait until the ship is rising, the bow of the ship is rising, pop the brakes, take off, and then you see this photo right here. That's Cole and Doolittle lifting off from the B-25s. There are online on Wikipedia, there are some videos, some of the later aircraft coming off the deck. You see the aircraft dip below, you can't see it anymore, and then all of a sudden it comes back up. That's how dicey this was. Let's talk a little bit about how dicey this was. You see, there's 16 aircraft. The aircraft carrier is 800, the flight deck is a little over 800 feet long. Okay? Well, Doolittle can't be back there at the end without pushing the other 15 guys into the water. He's got to start from about halfway down the deck. Even the last aircraft comes up forward because the captain doesn't want a B-25 to crash into his bridge if he loses direction. So you've got essentially 400 feet to get off, and they do. They go overfly Japan, they drop their bombs on their targets. One of the aircraft has mechanical troubles, diverts to what was then the Soviet Union, Vladivostok in Russia. A year plus later, they're delivered up in Iran. They're delivered up to U.S. forces in Iran. The Russians were not at war with the Japanese, so technically they had interned that American crew. They turned a blind eye, sent them all the way through Russia down to Iran. They recovered. Some of the crews were shot down. They were lost in action. The Japanese actually executed some of them. Most of the aircraft made it to China. None of them made it to a friendly airfield. They all had to bail out. Okay? Doolittle's on the ground and he's thinking to himself, I've completely failed. I've lost all my aircraft, got crews scattered all over China. Little did he know, he gets back to the U.S. and we gave him the Medal of Honor. He went on to lead Bob mentioned the 8th Air Force. Doolittle went on to lead the 8th Air Force in Europe and attacking the Germans. Okay. Come on this way, folks. I mentioned that the Piper Cub was Jack the Fact of the 1940s war. In Vietnam, when I was a young officer, we had the 01 Bird Dog. Okay, coming back, it's an entirely different airplane. Everybody's happy as a clam. Helicopters in general can be used for transporting passengers. They're also used for medevac. The King of England, good old Charles III, owns not one but 2 aircraft like this, painted purple. We have a photo of it somewhere around here. On the other side. Yeah. Royal purple, and of course Charles and both of his sons are helicopter pilots. So, okay, everybody been in that wants to be in?